For thousands of years, human beings have sung together, creating beauty, harmony, community, and joy. Here on How Can I Keep From Singing, we talk about this ancient art form, exploring the power, the reasons, and some of the how-to. I'm your host, Stuart Stotts, coming to you from rural Wisconsin, and my guest today is Rhiannon. I've known of Rhiannon's work as an instigator for inspired improvisation for years. She's a vocal artist with a vision of music as a vehicle for innovation, healing, transformation, and social change. A vibrant, gifted singer, performance artist, composer, and master teacher, Rhiannon has been bringing her unique and potent blend of jazz, world music, improvisation, and storytelling to audiences for over 4 decades. Collaborations include the all-women's jazz ensemble Alive, a cappella ensembles SoVoSo and We Be Three, Bobby McFerrin Voicestra and Gimme 5, and more. Her book about her life and teaching methods, Vocal River, The Skill and Spirit of Improvisation, was published in 2013. Rhiannon lives and works on her farm in Hawaii, cultivating a teaching performance space. This space honors culture, community, and of course, music. Rhiannon, welcome to How Can I Keep From Singing?
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm honored that you could find time to talk with us about singing. I know it's been your life for a long, long time. Start with just the beginning. You were raised in Nebraska. How did you move from a pretty rural setting to this world-traveling, improvising singer-composer?
I was born on the banks of the Missouri River, which is the border between Nebraska and South Dakota. Very much prairie. My dad was a farmer, completely rural where we were. We were 7 miles from the nearest very small town. I grew up with a father who was a farmer and therefore an improviser, and taught me that improvising is not just a music skill as I've lived it out, but actually it's one of those life skills that teaches you that there are these choices going on all the time, maybe multiple choices. And the idea is to get flexible enough to find out how to choose in the moment. So I grew up there with my mom and dad, who were both very interested in music and dance. I bet a lot of people don't know how many farmers actually love music and dance. And my parents had dance groups that they collaborated with. There was a lot of arts that went on around our house. And my parents, who were some years the crops were good and we were middle class. Some years the crops were not good. The cattle prices were not good and we were deeply working class. So I feel like what kept them going was music and dance and the understanding that they wanted to raise their children knowing about the arts. So we somehow had music lessons, piano lessons as we were growing up. And then when my parents recognized how much I liked to sing, they got me voice lessons. I don't know how they actually afforded all that, but I had lessons from like the time I was maybe 9 all the way through high school. So I was pretty devoted to it by the time I left home and went off to college, but I didn't know what music I loved. Being there in the prairie, there was no jazz, there was no improvising, there was big bands. So when I got to college, I quit singing altogether. I don't think I even sang in the shower. I became an actor. I majored in acting both as an undergraduate, and my graduate degree was from Cornell in acting as well. So I did this big switch. I was going to be an actor. And then I moved to New York after graduate school, and it was so hard. With so much daily rejection. But what happened is I would go to jazz clubs at night. I had my day job with a nonprofit, and I would go to auditions at lunch and get rejected. And then at night, I would go to jazz clubs and try to understand how they were following each other. So I think my first real compelling connection to jazz was trying to understand how they followed each other. And that was inside of song form, because jazz improvisers are using charts mostly. And I couldn't figure out how they were finding the bridge, how they were getting back to the top of the tune. So I just kept watching and trying to figure that out. So that was really my first just dive into all that. And I was doing a lot of theater improvisation. I hung out with a lot of actors, but also a lot of musicians. I saw those forms as being very complementary. I did a lot of musical theater as well, and street theater. I was in a street theater in Chicago, actually a very famous one called the Free Street Theater. It was a great training ground because we were all expected to sing, dance, act, interact with the public, think about the political situation we were in. So it was very, very beautiful. That was in the late 60s. And then I moved to San Francisco in the early 70s. Lucky me, because the Bay Area was loaded with improvisers. It was loaded with artists. It was loaded with freedom. So I was a cabbie for my living, and I just delved into every aspect of the arts that I could, which at that point was mostly improvising. The Blake Street Hawkeyes, out of which came Whoopi Goldberg, a beautiful form called action theater with my friend Ruth Zipporah. So the dancers and the actors and the singers, photographers, painters, we all hung out together. I couldn't have been luckier. And so I was doing a lot of improvising, but it was very free improvising, very extended. I have no idea how audiences tolerated the extended improvising we were doing. But it was this deep exploration of where are the edges? What are the boundaries? What is our obligation to the audience? How do we find center within ourselves? How do we create a kind of arc in the performance? I realized I was only going to learn so much in this free improvising realm because they were stretching it constantly. So I went deeper into my love of jazz, and I started learning repertoire. I started taking courses at the local junior college and trying to understand everything I could about this music, developing repertoire, starting to do gigs with bands. And that was a really creative time. And I will always treasure jazz as this form from which I learned so much about rhythm and melodic ideas and collaborating in bands and understanding instrumentalist point of view. And then I met Bobby McFerrin. No, first I met her live. I realized I wanted to write my own jazz inspired pieces, and I met these other women at a workshop. And we created a 5-piece ensemble that lasted for 10 years. We traveled all over the country. We had our own RV. The women's music scene was very, very powerful, mid 70s into the mid 80s. So we were produced almost always by women in various towns and cities across the country. And then alongside of that, we had a manager named Helen Keene. She was Bill Evans' manager. And she thought, oh, I can get these women into the jazz scene. This will be big. But she hadn't counted on the misogyny around women in jazz. So we just couldn't push through. But we did play a lot of jazz festivals and jazz clubs around the country alongside of doing the women's concerts. It was a very powerful time because we were writing mostly our own music and traveling for months. We would go out for months at a time. Those women, we are family forever, forever and ever. And we made 3 albums and had a very beautiful life of a band. And just as that was ending, I met Bobby McFerrin. He was coming on the scene in the Bay Area, and I would go and watch him. He was just singing standards at the beginning and pop tunes. I would watch him and think, what is he doing? There was something about the way he improvised, the freedom of his sound palette. And so, of course, I stayed afterwards and knocked on his dressing room door and met him. And I started sitting in with him at certain gigs. He began to let go of repertoire. I remember hearing him sing Spain a cappella, which is one of his most beautiful improvisations that he did on a jazz piece by Chick Corea. And when I heard him do that, I thought, oh, the doors are blown off what singers can do with their voices. I had become friends with him by then, and I just was around him as much as I could because I recognized a kind of genius that he is. I would say my most primary teacher.
You are
listening to How Can I Keep From Singing? My name is Stuart Stotts, and my guest today is Rhiannon. Let's talk about improvisation a little bit. I want to keep going with the story, but I want to go back to this idea of improvisation and the sense, first of all, that you talk about your parents and your father in particular being an improviser in life. And I have a quote from you somewhere that said, essentially, that the next step in education is teaching improvisation. That this is central. It's not just about improvising as a singer. It's about a way of interfacing with life. From what I am hearing, improvisation sometimes is in response to a problem. For example, how do we fix the wheel on the wagon? Sometimes it takes place within a template, like jazz, like scat singing in jazz. It's improvised, but it's within the 32 bars. And then there's this other step that you're talking about, which on the one hand, to do as an individual is possible. You can just get up there and sing, whatever. But working as a group, that kind of improvisation seems to me to be really quite challenging. Talk a little bit about that.
You're asking me my favorite question. Bobby, he, of course, studied all kinds of standards to become the improviser that he is. Because in my ears, unless you have a pretty big repertoire, you have limited data in your memory bank. So the more music you know, the more melodies you know, the more rhythms you know. When you go to improvise, the more information you got. Working with Bobby, I came to him through Voicestra, the 12-member vocal ensemble. And it was, in the beginning, we were doing his repertoire. And then we were improvising, fully improvised concerts. But all of that time, Bobby was the leader, the unflinching leader. And we were so lucky to be studying with him. But he was the leader. And he would always have me improvise, and different people would improvise, but we were always inside the structure of Bobby's taking care of it. Bobby's got it. So at one point, he went off to do some classical conducting, and I started hanging out with Joey Blake and David Worm, who were both in the Voicestra. And we were thinking, well, what if Bobby doesn't come back? How can we improvise and not just pattern, but how can we actually make a chord progression that becomes more song form without anyone leading the way? And that's what got me where I am now. Because the early improvising I did was very sound-based, very free, very frequently did not have rhythmic structure. And I got tired of it because I felt like the audience couldn't fully participate. They were having all this stuff blasted at them, but there wasn't enough form that people could hold on to it and actually be part of the ride. So studying with Bobby, the two beautiful things about him are he almost always creates beautiful rhythmic structures, and his melodies are incredible. They're very worldly. They're from all kind of genres and folk musics from the whole world. So I kept putting that in my mind, like when I improvise, I want to make sure that it actually has a relationship to song form. It can go out at certain points, but the song form allows everybody to participate. And if you're with other people, you can figure each other out, because we have a lot of structures in Western music that we're all familiar with. So if somebody makes a certain movement, a lot of times we'll know where that could go, various ways it could go, and we can follow. I worked with Joey and David, and the three of us could do it. That's what We Be Three was, totally improvised concerts. Nobody was the leader. Anybody could start a piece. We just all agreed to follow one another and see where it would go. And that was so electrifying. The three of us walking to microphones, no information, empty, and then go. That gave all of us a lot of courage and a lot of information about how expansive it was. So then when I started teaching, I thought, I want to teach people about circle singing because I really love that. It's such a beautiful form and allows everybody in the circle. It's usually 4 parts, and somebody in the middle conducts improvised patterns. And people jump onto those patterns, and then you can change the patterns. You keep evolving the music. That comes directly from Bobby. And it's a beautiful way for people to enter. And it hardly ever has lyrics. It's usually an improvised kind of personal language. But what I wanted to do was figure out how can like 3 to 8 or 12 people create an improvisation without a known leader and have a sense of that being a musical experience that's got chord changes and shifts and a bridge and so that's how I've directed my teaching, partly because it's musically so interesting. But what I began to understand is that's like a whole cultural and social phenomenon of how you create leadership that easily shifts from one person to another, which is what we seem to need so badly in the world, is that there isn't this one leader, that we really all have a piece of the information and anybody can grab hold of it who has an idea, and we're all listening to how it might shift without a big clunk. And what I realized as I started teaching is this is totally possible. I just have to get people to listen deeply, to surrender to the ensemble, to be prepared to step up and take hold of the lead when it's your turn, how to collaborate, how to blend, how to harmonize. That has kept me really occupied for 50 years.
You're listening to How Can I Keep From Singing? My name is Stuart Stotts, and my guest today is Rhiannon. You talked a little bit in something that I read, talking about teaching trust and forgiveness and generosity, supporting each other, and making your partner look good, which I loved. Tell me a little bit about, so how does this work? You've got, let's say, 12 people in a room. What happens?
So I developed a bunch of forms, and for a long time, I had no idea that I was going to write a book about it. That seemed like an anachronism for an improviser. Why would I do that? But then I thought, oh, actually, I usually do teach this at the beginning, and I don't teach that until later. Now I switch them all up, but I started by something that I called spirolution, which is a series of exercises that go in a circle. And everybody has a little piece of it. So nobody's got a huge stake. Everybody's got a little piece of it. The first part might be I create a simple pattern. Go to blah, go to blah. That's the pattern. And I sing it maybe 10 times. Everybody's singing it with me. It's not difficult. Everybody can get it. And after I feel like everybody's got a hold of it, so I'm tuning into the room all the time. I'm watching to make sure nobody's got that scared look on their face. So if they do, I just keep repeating it until I can see that people have relaxed. And then I hold my hand up, and the next time I sing a pattern, I do a slight variation. So instead of oh doublea, I go oh doublea. And then they sing back to me, oh doublea. And then we go oh doublea, back to the original pattern. And then the person next to me does a variation of the pattern. We sing the pattern back to them, then we do the original pattern, and so on all around the circle. It moves so quickly, nobody has a time to plan. Planning is the first thing we got to send out the window. Because if you're planning, you're not listening. You're deep inside your own box. Partly what I'm teaching people about trust is just that. You have to trust that when it comes your turn, you're going to open your mouth and something will come out that will work. Doesn't have to be brilliant. It just has to fit in this little simple exercise we're doing. And you can also say, I pass, it's too much for me. I try to make it really a safe space for people. Trust feels like a critical thing, and you've got to trust your partners. So this begins to develop trust so that the person next to you is going to hand off to you in a reasonable way. We're just developing community right from the beginning. And these are layers upon layers. It feels to me like every exercise has some element of trust that I begin to see how we could further that idea. And generosity, music is a business in a lot of the world. In a lot of the world, it is not. But in the part of the world, like in Western Europe, in North America, there's a lot of competition. And competition does not really beget generosity. People are trying to protect their own turf, their own song. They don't want to share because somebody else could grab it. And I learned this from Bobby in the Voicestra. We were all equal. Everybody was going to get equal time. We were all in this cooperative, and anybody that didn't get that ended up leaving. You had to kind of let go of your ego about the thing. And stress reduction from letting go of that and just feeling like all I have to do is my part. Just need to hold my part of this together and make sure that the circle stays strong and that I'm a collaborative member of this group. Something about that was just enormously relaxing to me because I'd been traveling around the world all by myself, gigging, and like, oh my God, it was wonderful. And it was also very stressful trying to make money, have an idea that was cooler than anybody else's idea. Bobby really helped me let go of that. And I really wanted to promote that idea with singers so that in All the Way In, which is a year-long program, people develop community during the year. So by the end of the year, they're so loving of one another. They want the best for each other. They're collaborating on projects and they develop lifelong relationships. That is so, so, so important in art forms that we don't somehow compete ourselves out of the best friends we could ever have.
You're listening to How Can I Keep From Singing? My name is Stuart Stotts and my guest today is Rhiannon. On the one hand, you're really modeling and creating a different way of being together. Leadership, community, mutual support, all these kinds of things that are coming through this process.
Thank you, the women's movement.
Yes, yeah, right, exactly, right. This way we can experience in our bodies and with our voices a different way of being together. Talk a little bit, Rhiannon, about the musical side of that. So on the one hand, people are feeling this sort of soul and spiritual connection. I'm guessing that there's something really powerful that just happens in the music itself as well.
Great questions. For me, I wanted to stay interested in my teaching. That means for a long, long time, I taught beginning students. We just kept doing these beginning exercises together while I learned what that meant and how that, I mean, my students being my completely best teachers. So I over and over again was evolving these beginning exercises. And then I started thinking, I want singers who could actually push me. So I started quantifying my classes with some that were for more advanced students. And then I would have them try all kinds of things that were stronger, like exercises that demanded that they could create a really coherent melody, that they could harmonize with somebody else in a really free kind of way, that they could hear one another and figure out what was missing and what would add. So then I started developing these small ensemble exercises. There would be 3 people or 5 people or 8 or 12 people. And the idea was that they were to create a piece of music using a set number of ideas that made the exercise work. There's one that's called Turn. It's usually got 5 people in it. They turn and face the wall. I do this after I train them to think about all the ways you can enter an improvisation. You can create a pattern, which would make you usually the motor, It's got space, it's not complicated, but it allows an invitation to other people to enter. Then there's a harmony of the motor. Then there's an interlocking part, which doesn't land its heavy, strong beats on the same place as the motor does, so that you start to get this lock of ideas, syncopation, interlocking, that kind of idea. The way that instrumentalists are trained, like drummers and bass players and piano players, guitar players, they're all trained to interlock. And then a counter melody, which would be a kind of melodic idea that uses different notes of the scale, like the 7, the 5, the 2, the 9, in order to create a melodic idea that really opens our ears instead of getting stuck on the 1, 3, 5 octave, and then bass lines, and then percussion, and then other harmonies. See what I mean? I'm teaching them the ways to enter so that they can enter, they know all of those. As soon as they know all of those, and they usually work in small ensemble to practice those, once they know those ways of entering, then they can understand what the music might need. And the bottom line in all of improvisation is, what does the music want? What does the music want? Not what is my cool idea, what is going to be really flashy here, but what will make this really work? I just need to harmonize. That idea is going to be stronger if I harmonize it. Okay, so turn. Then anybody can turn at any point and they're patterning. They turn and they start singing a pattern that's whatever. And then that gets the thing going, and anybody can turn at any point and add to it. When you feel like your idea is done, you turn away and you stop singing. And when you come back in, you come back in with a new idea. So it's very fluctuating. But if people settle down into this, the music that comes out of it is so facile and so interesting. Sometimes everybody's on harmonies of one idea. Sometimes it's all percussive. Sometimes there's a short solo where everybody's supporting it. What I'm doing is trying to get people to think, how do you create an improvisation that's got legs? So that you don't just go up and pattern, 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 but you use patterns as a way in to a more freestyle kind of running musical collaborative idea. And I've been astonished at the wonderful music that has come from that.
I'm so intrigued by this. I'm wondering, often when I've done these interviews, it's with sort of folk singers who are teaching a song and we're going to sing it together as an audience. I'm sure you've experienced that many times. What
Mhm.
can a person take from this who's interested in singing? Maybe they can't come and do a class with you. What can someone walk away thinking about or trying that can move them in this direction?
I wrote the book and I put 33 cards with them. Each one has a different exercise on it. And that's very useful, especially if you have a couple of friends you can play with. I have a double CD that's called Flight, in which I set up a bunch of improvisations in different kind of ways, and you get to join in. There's some kind of warm up things, and then I have 5 other singers that come on with me to create more of an ensemble. So you really get a band underneath you. That's really fun. I'm about to release a whole bunch of, maybe it's like 25 videos of these different exercises with an ensemble doing them. And then I'm commenting on how it's going and talking about what the exercise is, because I know people can't always get to me. And there's also an international global organization called The Well that has a big map of the world and tells you where the teachers are, where the classes are, where the gigs are. And that's been wildly successful. Vocal improvisation is now all over the world and in all kinds of beautiful forms that are growing. So come to me, but go sing by all means.
It's a wide open world that you're describing. It's just very beautiful. I want to thank you so much for talking with me here today. It's just
You're
been
so welcome,
a
Stuart.
complete pleasure. And we'll put information about all of this in the notes for the show. So,
Great.
guest today, Rhiannon, thank you so much for talking with us.
You're so welcome. Keep singing, everybody. Bob, da, do, da, 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 ah.
We blend together, blend together as we sing, blend together as we sing, blend
You've been listening to How Can I Keep Singing, a production of Common Arts. My name is Stuart Stutz, and my guest today was Rhiannon.
Improvise, improvise.